can't save the world with awakening. Yeah, I don't want to sort of burst anyone's bubble about this, but it comes into my awareness working with various people or just interacting with different people to say this on occasion, not because I think people have like a savior complex necessarily. I guess some people do, but actually more because people are naturally compassionate. People are naturally empathic. And some people who sort of engage this process are deeply compassionate, profoundly compassionate. I wouldn't say everyone is. I think in some way to engage this process, you have to care about truth, like truth beyond knowledge and teaching and so forth. Truth even beyond really the confines of your own identity to some degree. But it doesn't mean you're necessarily a like empathically compassionate human being initially. In fact, many people are rather self-centered, right? And to some degree, we all are. But some people are really profoundly compassionate. And as they engage this process, I wouldn't say the compassion holds them up necessarily, but I would say that the beliefs about compassion, beliefs about how compassion needs to play into this, what this awakening process means as far as that compassion, that can be trip them up a little bit. It can be a bit of a distraction, just like anything, that's a fixation can be. And I think sometimes it's just important to say this to people that, it's wonderful to be a deeply compassionate person when it comes to awakening, spirituality, this unbinding process, liberation, all of it, especially later on, especially later down the road. Because when there's true insight, when there's profound insight, awake insight into the nature of reality and to the nature of identity and so forth, excuse me, then that insight driven through the sort of body mind that is oriented toward compassion naturally is very powerful. It's very powerful at transmitting. And even if it's not directly transmitting insight, it's very powerful at seeing the needs that are in front of you, the needs of the world and of humans that are suffering, of animals that are suffering. And a lot of energy can go into that in intelligent ways and insightful ways. And it can be very natural. It's really wonderful. But earlier on, it can really trip you up because the compassion can feel so heavy that it can be very daunting, right? What do I do about all this suffering in the world? Or what do I do about the suffering in the people around me, my family, my friends, my loved ones? I can feel their suffering so intensely. I empathize with their emotional states and their resistance to their emotional states so strongly. And the simple answer I often give is something along these lines. And I'll just say it simply here as a reminder if anyone sort of wants to pull this out of their pocket when they come across this. But it's simply that compassion has to start with you, meaning you can't liberate anyone else. I can't liberate anyone else. No one can liberate another. Really, it's true. I can reflect. I can investigate with someone. I can inquire with someone. And there is a sort of transmission, I think, that comes, but it's not one way. It's just not like that. But I can't choose who wakes up, period. I can't choose for my family members to wake up. I can't choose for my friends to wake up. I can't choose for the person who's closest to me in this world to wake up. It doesn't work that way. People are going to wake up or they're not. And they're going to wake up when they're going to wake up. And they're going to wake up how fast they're going to wake up and to what degree. You have no choice over any of that. You just don't. And it took me a long time to realize that because the more I sort of woke up, the more I felt through this compassion and this sort of almost transcendent compassion, the suffering of people in a very acute way. And I could also see what they're doing in a way to cause themselves suffering. And yet, if I put my finger on that scale in any way, like pushing in any way at all, or suggesting even when they're not really ready, it doesn't work. And it can even turn them off to the process. So I learned, this is years ago now, but I learned like, it's not my business. I don't push it on anyone. I don't at all. I don't suggest it. In fact, I'm more disinclined to talk about it than I'm inclined to talk about it. And at the same time, I still feel everybody's suffering in a very direct sort of way. But it's interesting because through liberation, one is freed of the resistance around suffering. So I can recognize suffering as suffering, but it doesn't cause personal suffering anymore, if that makes sense. It's hard to describe this, how it actually plays out. But it is true what I'm saying, that you can get to a place of true equanimity where you do recognize suffering, but it's also not suffering, because you can see how the suffering is actually based on resistance and perspective. And you can also see that those resistance patterns and perspectives don't actually exist, which is really weird, right? Also, maybe that's why you can transmit. But it takes a long time, I think, for that kind of deeper wisdom to set in, to like sort of transcendent wisdom. It takes experience and insight. Before that, sometimes you just have to keep reminding yourself, like, I can't save the world, but I can continue to wake up. Yes. And so that comes to the next part, is like, we often have an altruistic aspect to this. We really do care. We really do empathically feel the suffering of others. And there's also a selfish aspect, for sure. And the selfish aspect it comes into various forms. One is, I want the world to be peaceful and safe because I don't want it to reflect back to me the truth I don't want to look at, that this body mind is going to grow old, decay, become ill, and die. That's going to happen to all of us. Like, I don't want to see that. So I'd rather not see it in the world, right? So then I want to help the world. Like, I know that sounds terrible, but it's also true. We do this to ourselves. This can happen with people who get preachy about certain ways of eating or different things, right? It's like almost believing that if I can compel the world to be more what I consider to be peaceful or right, then somehow it's actually going to protect me from the inevitable. But it won't. It won't protect you from the inevitable. Nothing will. Yeah. The inevitable is the inevitable. And so that's an important thing to learn, right? Other selfish aspects can be like, I don't want to feel the empathy, right? I don't want to feel your stuff that I'm always feeling around you, like anger and grief and repressed emotion. So I want you to wake up because I don't want to have to keep feeling that, right? You also have to get over that. You have to mature beyond that. You can still feel it and empathize with someone, but you don't have to try to change it or fix it unless that's what they're really interested in doing. And maybe you can at best support it at that point. So that's another way we kind of selfishly look at this. Another one is we use it to disassociate. We can get really distracted with like political issues and world issues. Not that they don't matter, not that you shouldn't have some knowledge there, and maybe even some activism if you're wired that way and you really think you can help. Those all may come into your life. But what I really mean is being distracted by it, using your distraction with the problems of the world in various ways, even ones that aren't happening right now, like maybe in the past, or injustices and all this, using all of that to keep yourself in your head and not actually start addressing your own suffering. This is really common. And it's also the kind of thing it's very hard to say directly to someone, because if you're wired that way, or not wired, but if you're conditioned that way, you often really don't want to see that. And it'll sometimes really trigger people. So I wouldn't say this directly to someone, but I would just say, keep in mind that this can also happen and it's also part of it. And how can I know this? I've had all of these fixations. Like, I've had all these conditioned experiences. Like, I get it, but just know that this is a mixed bag, right? Anytime we have a fixation or a strong tendency to orient or focus our attention on something or specific aspect of our experience or emotion or anything, it's often a mixed bag, meaning we may have some altruistic movement with it, some altruistic aspect to it, some empathic movement underneath it, some true compassion. And we also have that mixed with selfishness, right? That's important to see. And as that selfishness dissolves, you'll actually see the empathic aspect of it, the compassionate aspect of it, in a much more universal and clear way. And you'll see when you can be helpful and when you can't be helpful. And you'll see when you're distracting yourself and when you're not. And then you'll more and more, as this deepens, you'll realize what you can do is continue to wake up, continue to inquire, continue to be open, continue to take feedback if you need it, continue to expose yourself to a teacher who's more realized than you are. All of it, right? Being open to that, being open to seeing any fixations, latent tendencies, all of this stuff sticks around for a long time in us, right? As long as we're alive, we're going to have some conditioned responses. Of course we are. So being open to all of that and just letting it continue to unfold, that's really the key. And anytime you notice these fixations on, again, a fixation on compassion or worrying about worldviews and that, just ask yourself, like, oh, okay, am I actually avoiding something here? Could just be avoiding of an emotion, or it could be avoiding some fear of like stepping over the edge, right? That comes too. So anyway, just be willing to actually see what's really going on, and this will all take care of itself. Clear seeing is always key. Clear seeing is always key when it comes to this stuff. And like I said, overall, if you truly have a deep and compassionate caring for the world, for humans suffering, for animals suffering, for just truth, that will benefit you and it'll benefit everyone else. But like anything else, it can become a fixation, and the ego is the ultimate opportunist. It will take that and in a way turn it against you if you're not clear on what's happening. So hopefully that's helpful. Let me know your thoughts on that.